Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight and hearing our little talk about the knot basket and this kind of exciting detective work that we've been doing for the last year or two. We looked at a few of the names signing in here and are delighted to see a lot of familiar names and fellow Sloiters. Some of my, anyway, former instructors or present instructors, whether you maybe know it or not, mentors. And we've even seen people coming from different parts of the world. And this is just so cool.
And some basket makers too.
And some basket makers, which is very humbling. I've been on a very short journey of basket making, and I know there's some incredible basket makers in the audience here. That's just great. We're going to kind of cover three different parts here. We're going to describe and explain what the Knutkorg is and the basic construction of it. And then Fred is going to go through the materials and the methods for making a basket, a Knutkorg basket. And then we're going to get into this really fun part of how we've tracked the research, where we've tracked this basket, finding it in Scandinavia and suddenly seeing it pop up here in Minnesota around the turn of the century. So, Fred, why don't you explain a little bit about just baskets in general and the context of.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Yeah. I think it's in a modern world, it's kind of easy to forget that baskets are all around us. Some of them, when you go into the grocery store, you pick up a plastic shopping basket. And a lot of times we don't think about baskets, but if you go to grocery stores or co-ops, that's what's holding the onions or the potatoes, things like that. People walk to farmers markets with them. And you see plastic baskets now made of really heavy fishing twine or same sort of thing you find in a tennis racket that are all handmade coming out of Mexico, and people use them in their houses all over. And baskets have always been with us. They're one of the oldest known findings archaeologically, other than stone points that have been found. And baskets were used for everything. And in particular, in Norway, if they didn't have baskets, you couldn't haul the cow manure out of the cow shed and take it up to the little fields up on the fjord where it's slightly flat. And they used those to also haul everything else. So, and they were used for going to church and everything. So they're kind of ubiquitous, and yet we still don't think about them that much, unless you're like a basket maker. And we're used to hauling everything in a shopping bag, whether it be plastic or paper. So I think that's important to think about it that way. But baskets used to be everywhere and probably still are, actually. So the baskets that we're going to focus on are called, we're calling Knutkorg. And in this slide, you'll see 4 examples. And the 2 on top are probably from the United States. The one on the right at the top is one of our baskets that we've found. The 2 on the bottom are Swedish one on the left and probably a Norwegian or telemark basket on the right. And the distinguishing characteristics of these is the construction, and they all have really nice C-shaped frames that all lock together. And I think we could go to the next slide. And this is an example. And maybe I should grab a basket and just so I have something to point to. What makes these baskets quite nice is this C-shaped frame that runs all the way around here. And there are 4 interlocking pieces that make this basket up to make this one a rectangle. So, and then you've got the infill, which is the weaving, and that's this part here, and these slats on the corner, and then the handle. And for us, these are, for this basket, this is all local materials. And in this picture, I'll just go through it real quickly, this slide. The one on the top, these are all, the 3 of the baskets are from Minnesota. The one on the lower left is from Bulgaria from the 1930s. This was sent to us by a friend that sent us several images of baskets in his collection. And what's interesting about it is that it's a flat frame, and then it's got roots that go completely around to make all the infill weaving. So it's still a Knutkorg, but it's just differently woven. And then we'll go to the next slide. These are all baskets, Knutkorg, in the Vesterheim collection, and you can see their accession numbers. So if you're interested in learning more about them, you can look them up or talk to somebody in the registrar's office. And there are two on the far right, the top and bottom. Those are the two Norwegian or telemark sendings or Knutkorg. And then there's two on the left and one in the middle on the bottom. And those are all Knutkorg. And so the handleless, there are two that are handleless, but they all show the same kind of construction, except that some of them have willow used as part of the infill or weaving around the slats. And then the center one at top, even though it's not technically a Knutkorg, is modeled on that, and it's done with mortise and tenons, and it's still sort of a more like the two on the right. So those are the differences. And we include that so you don't get confused, or maybe it will confuse you later. It's hard to tell. So we'll see. And I think what we should do is there's at the bottom of the slide, it says Sendingskorg, or Sendingskurv and Knutkorg or Knutkurv. And I think since Jane is the language person here and knows Norwegian, I think she'd be good at explaining the difference between the names for the usage and the construction. So go ahead.
I will give it a try, but I would also welcome any comments from other Scandinavian language
Good
maybe native speakers or more experts. But when you have the word Sendingskorg or sending basket, we're interpreting that to mean a type of gift wrap or something that would have been given on a special occasion containing a gift, like some smoked meats or cheeses for, say, a wedding or a funeral, maybe the birth of a child, something like that. And so it would be a really well-made basket, a lot of times decorated with the painting that you see on the three from Scandinavia there. But a Sendingskorg could be a Knutkorg, but it could also be like the top middle one, which is not a Knutkorg. It's a mortise and tenon construction on that basket, but yet it falls into the category of Sendingskorg in the Vesterheim Museum. So that's where we've gotten on running down the names like that, but would sure appreciate any other input on it. And of course, the difference between the Korg and the Kurv are Swedish versus Norwegian, but then you get into dialects and it's all kind of fluid. But if you were going to search for these baskets, say in a digital museum or on Instagram or something like that, you might want to substitute all these different versions of the name.
So is the Knutkorg different then? That's more to do with the construction, you're saying?
Yes, the Knutkorg would be the knot basket, and they all have the special joint in the corners.
Okay.
And that's what makes it the knot basket.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Should we go to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a little booklet. I have one here. I'll just show you this one. This is one, and it was given to me by David Susag, who at the Vesterheim Museum when I was down there teaching a class. And but I think what I should talk about first of all is that this was my first experience with the basket, other than David's booklet that he gave me, was when I was 14. I went to a farm auction with my teacher, Charlie. And Charlie we were there for an auction to see what we could find. And Charlie reached into this farm wagon and lifted up this basket kind of reverently, and then immediately started to explain to me and his son, who was there as well, what this basket was and how it was made. And that image is burned in my memory. And I never really lost interest in those baskets. So they were always something I was looking for because I found them so interesting. So then when I was given this pamphlet or booklet by David Susag, I was very excited because I always wanted to learn how to make these. And so what happened was that I can't read Norwegian. So even though I have Norwegian heritage, so I found my friend Jane, and she gladly translated this booklet. And that's how we started making some of these baskets, or attempting to. I also had made one on my own with another instructor from North House. And so that was one. I still have that basket, and I made a few others as well. But I think we should talk about, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Fred asked me to translate this, and I took it on as a fun project. Is anybody who's done translating of technical, this is kind of a technical thing where they're talking about different parts of, and I wasn't a basket maker. So it was a little bit of a slog for me to get through this, but a lot of fun at the same time because it's full of these great drawings. And so as I translated, it's the directions for making a Sendingskorg with a bent frame is what it's titled. And you can see it's put out by Norwegian Husflid. And so by the time I finished translating it, I had a pretty good understanding of how the baskets went together.
And then Jane, we were doing a little cabin during COVID. And Jane and I were with some other people. And Jane had was interested in these baskets, of course. And suddenly she found.
Well, I think we started making them.
We started making it.
Yeah, we.
She was just interested in making.
Show me. Fred had made a basket. I'm like, come on, show me how to do this. Let's do this. So Fred and I and a couple of other people started to make them.
And we'd already gone through spoons, so this was something different completely.
Okay, next slide.
So what we did was we've had to figure out where the nearest source of willows were for the frames. So we went down to the river, and here underneath the power lines where they trim frequently were all these willows, just perfectly sized and just the right height. So we ended up collecting a bunch of willows, as you see in the pictures here. They're nice and straight. They grow. Those are maybe 2 to 3 year old shoots of willow, and so they grow very fast and very strong and have great fiber for the corners.
Yeah, since then we've found there's 22 species of willow in Minnesota.
Right.
And this isn't the only species that grows real straight like this. So if you're interested in trying this yourself, if you just look around a little bit, you'll find, especially in northern Minnesota, there's a lot of them that grow straight and are perfect for this.
And some willows are just not good for the bending. So they're too brittle, but that comes with experience. So
next slide.
The next slide. So here's just a quick little, these are the joints that actually make up the knot part of the basket. And this is the part, I don't know if you could see the first slide. First picture shows the part that actually bends around the knot, which is the last slide, or the third one over, third picture. And then the center one shows it being bent. So that's how you make the frames. And they're all connected. And then that last time you put that last knot in, or little with the end on it, it hooks and you can go to the next slide. Then the frame is together, but it sometimes can be a little sloppy until you add the corner slats, which then make the frame pretty rigid. So that's the frame there. And
I think we should say too, as we stumbled our way through it, we harvested probably at the wrong time of the year because our bark didn't come off readily. We had to scrape it off basically, which didn't leave a nice finish. We learned later that maybe it would have been better to harvest in the spring when the sap was running. And also to do this properly, you'd leave the bark on until you got to this point. where it was all assembled. And that's to keep the corners from blowing out as you bend them.
Right. And then the next slide. And this is another fellow, and Jane, and the other fellow also made these baskets with us. And they had found some really nice ash that a beaver had cut down, and it split just beautifully. So that was used for the handles. So it's always nice to have a couple of helpers in the woods working ahead of time for you. And I think we go to the next one. And then this is green bent.
Yeah,
right?
the ash wood was green also.
Yeah, so they bent a bunch of handles. And there you can see also a bunch of frames all ready to go. Go to the next one. And then here, what we did was we just used whatever we could find for slats, corner slats, and for weavers. And one of the things we found was some trail cuttings of box elder, which was really young and straight. So we split those and used those. And then we had some beautiful straight grained red cedar, which you can see in the upper right corner there, makes this beautiful purple and white basket. And then I also went to a brush dump and found this gorgeous white cedar log that somebody had dropped off and asked if I could have it. And they said, well, okay. So, because they're not supposed to, but I took it and it split beautifully. So that's what we did for a whole day one time, just splitting slats and weavers. So we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah. So at the same time now that we're trying to learn to build these and get better at it, I was digging around on the internet and trying to find out more about it. And as most of you probably know, a lot of the items in the museums in Scandinavia have been digitally archived, and you can search them and you can see pictures and measurements and just amazing stuff. It's not easy, especially as a foreign speaker, but you can get in there and you can find them. And so I first was a little more familiar with the Norwegian museum and started to find examples of the basket around the Telemark area, Hordaland part of Norway. Spent a little time there, and this certainly isn't to say that they weren't found in other places, right. but I did find them there. And then we became aware of some active Knutkurv making going on in the upland region of Sweden. And I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is an example of one of the baskets from Telemark, dating back to the mid 1800s. Right. And it's got the distinctive color palette of Telemark, but it's clearly a Knutkorg.
And that has a flat frame in parts of it. So
sorry, Josh.
Yeah, that's all right. And
so here we are then finding them in this upland region of Sweden, and also became aware of this maker currently teaching, Göran Andersson. And here he is. We found him on Instagram and became aware of the culture going on now in a couple of the folk schools in Sweden where they're holding classes in making this. We eventually made contact with him and went with some members of Hemslöjd in Sweden. And there's an exhibit going on now celebrating baskets that's traveling around Sweden,
right.
hoping to lure them over here to the States so we can see these. But we look forward to connecting more with Göran. He's done a bunch of research, especially around Sweden, but also in the greater Scandinavian Baltic region on these baskets. He's full of knowledge, and we can't wait to learn from him. Meet him and learn.
Meet him and learn from him. Yeah.
All righty. Next one.
Yeah. So this is kind of, well, you should probably tell the story, but this was where we found the name of our first maker and of baskets in Minnesota. And this is the connection from Minnesota and Scandinavian countries and the tradition. And let me grab the basket that's right behind me here.
Yeah, well, Fred holds it up. So, like I say, I had figured out what these things should look like from doing the translation, and was in an antique store in St. Paul, and looked up and like, oh my God, that's one of those baskets. Called Fred right away.
And I told her to buy it.
Yeah, yeah. It was kind of a magical day. And from here, it had a label. Told us David had made this basket. And came as the next shock for me anyway. And it was labeled Poor Farm in St. Louis County in Duluth. And that was when the whole research took a turn, and this detective work kind of began. So this first basket, we see it, we know they're around now. So we start to ask our friends about them.
Right.
We wrote to a bunch of antique stores that we knew and some we didn't know, and asked if they had them. A lot of them had a couple in stock, and we were able to purchase them. And then our different Slighty friends, some of them we had been using these baskets for years. Some of them remembered seeing them around their own homes when they were growing up.
Yeah.
And as we bought a few, but we cataloged a lot more. Found
I think we
20,
found
30.
At least 20. 30, yeah, of these baskets.
Yeah. And as we studied them, we realized that they had certain marks, and we realized that they were of the same makers. And we connected another basket with the Poor Farm. And we had people telling us, oh, these are called Nopeming baskets, which is outside of Duluth, and there's a sanatorium there. And so all these different pointers to the Duluth Poor Farm. So we thought, well, what is the Poor Farm? What was that all about? And why don't you go to the next one there, I think, Josh. Next slide. Okay, yeah. Well, here's some of the baskets we found, or either bought or cataloged, right. Described and measured and photographed and whatnot, all seeming to point to this Duluth origin in 90 to 100 years ago, I guess, right?
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, poor farms, every county in Minnesota had one, because there was a state law that went, I think it was in 1867, that went into effect, maybe a little later, about every county having to have one. So there are none left. I think there's still 2 left in that are there, but they're not used for
right. They operated until the 50s, and I remember growing up, and my mom would tell us, if we left the lights on or the refrigerator open or something, we'd all end up in the Poor Farm. But Poor Farms actually existed, and sadly, they were for people who, for one reason or another, just ran out of options and couldn't support themselves, either through injury, from a logging or mining career, or just bad luck, and had nowhere else to turn to, no family that could take them in, another mouth to feed. And so here they were. They were referred to in the census, we later learned, as inmates, of all things. They were called inmates. You can look them up yourself in the 30s, 40s, at all the counties, that this is what they had. And we've got a couple of images here of, not our makers, but just some of it, living out their last days and maybe working as basket makers in the Poor Farm. And it got us thinking, what would that have been like to, be housed with a bunch of other people down on their luck, kind of, and what would you do with yourself? But then, here are these beautiful works of art coming out of this Poor Farm, and how did they end up there with this knowledge that we by this time had realized is no easy thing to make these beautiful baskets. It's so and what we found was, based on your story, what you happened to be in the right place at the right time. Yeah. So another pandemic thing, I'm sitting there on a board meeting with a museum that I'm on in northern Minnesota, and this background looked something like this. And my friend Bruce Kerfoot, who his family started and ran Gunflint Lodge on the Gunflint Trail, all of a sudden Bruce Kerfoot looks around my shoulder and says, I know exactly what those things are. Those are not baskets, and they were made at the Poor Farm by a bunch of Finnish guys. And
that was a shock when she told me.
Yeah. So Bruce told me as much as he could remember. He was born in the late 30s. And when he was just a little guy, 3-4 years old, his dad would take him down in the car to the Poor Farm, and they'd meet with these Finlanders, and they'd come back with a load of baskets, and they'd sell them at the lodge on the Gunflint Lodge on the Gunflint Trail. And that went on for years. He'd go down with his dad to collect them. And he remembered that the last time he'd gone by himself, so he was old enough to drive, but he was still in high school. He remembered there was one Finnish guy left, and he brought home 2 or 3 baskets and sold them. And that was the end of that.
In our research, we found that in Finland, strangely enough, this tradition of making this basket didn't seem to exist. That doesn't mean that it doesn't, but that's what we have been able to find so far, based on talking to some people at the craft museum there. And and what's interesting about this is, so this, if you want to go to the next slide, Josh. So what we found out was, based on talking to this curator in Finland, was that this person, David, whose name was on this basket that Jane found, may have come from Vaasa, Finland, and came to Duluth and then ended up, he was a logger and ended up am I remembering this right?
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he ended up at the Poor Farm and was making these baskets, as were a number of other Finns, obviously. Yep. So from the Kerfoot story.
Right.
So
one little detail.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. If any of you are doing genealogy research or interested in it, you know that one of the clues you can come up with are military draft registrations.
Right,
so
right.
That's where we took our maker and found out that he had registered for the military and put down his hometown as Vaasa,
Okay.
Finland. Yep.
Okay.
And from there, then we got a hold of a museum person in Finland and asked if she'd searched the digital archives in Finland for this basket, and there just weren't any.
No, nothing.
And like I say, not to say they weren't there, but now the mystery became even more intriguing because somehow this man had emigrated from Vaasa, and you can probably imagine the conditions he left from. And so how did he learn to make these baskets? Clearly he didn't learn when he was, in his later years and landed at the Poor Farm. He came with this knowledge, we believe, and maybe practiced it all his life. And then when he ended up here, he had the materials nearby and the time to do it. And it was a practice that was encouraged too by the Poor Farm. Maybe you'd like to cover that.
Yeah, and I think let's go to the next slide, Josh, if you would. I think to put this in a little context, it's in 1915, it's the arts and crafts movement, and then the picture is taken. The picture of this woman making a basket is 1925, and that's the Minneapolis Society for the Blind. There's a woman making baskets there, and baskets were seen as a way for people who had a hard time making it, as a healing art, and also as a way to make some money and to feel like they were of value. And what we found was, and I'll read this quote. This was in a journal on tuberculosis sanatoriums, and it says, the usual methods of treatment are employed, the institution being equipped for artificial pneumothorax work and other modern therapeutic measures. Convalescent patients are given work to do, and in some instances are paid wages. Basket making and gardening are industries already started. Pottery making and raising of poultry are planned for this year. And this little quote speaks specifically of the Nopaming Sanatorium in Duluth. Now, this does not mean that they were making necessarily making knot baskets, but it does give us a hint that this was an early thing for people to make in this and get some money and sell them maybe. So the next slide.
Yeah, maybe kind of explain.
Maybe go a little more.
Well, I'm thinking we'll talk about the tool marks and then how we
okay.
identified, and I'll hold up as you describe.
Oh, okay. That's fine. So this is the first basket that we found, and what is very interesting on this one that distinguishes it is this varnish that's all over it, and this wire harness that helps hold the basket together, which runs through the bottom to the other side, so it keeps it from coming apart. This is all made of local materials too. It's willow for the frame, white cedar for the weaving and the slats, and then black ash for the handles. And in this one in particular, this has this flared shoulder, and we see that in all the baskets, or almost all of the baskets that we found for this maker. And these brass screws, some of them are steel, and sometimes there's a nail here, but they're generally of this shape of a weaver too, with a rounded face on it and flat on the back from this maker. So that's how we identified a number of baskets that were not labeled. That doesn't mean they weren't made by other people too, but probably made by, if there were just a few making them, that probably were all had their own little bit of differences in style.
Right.
Yeah. So
I think I'll just
you want me to?
No, I'll get it. But hopefully you were able to see those details as Fred described them. And also Josh is using the pointer to point
right.
at them on the, and you can use your own slider, and you can make if you want to look at the picture of the actual basket, make that bigger, just use your slider.
Cool.
Okay.
Then
style 2.
Then we identified another maker, and you can see the basket in the picture full of slats. And this is the actual basket. And this one has a nail here at the bottom, still the wire harness, or the wire for supporting the bottom. And then the ash handle, it's not varnished, and almost all the baskets that we've found from this maker are not varnished. And then the screw here, and then the same materials, but these slats tend to be wider, these weavers, and they're flat on both sides. And you don't see them with the rounded faces at all. So, and the other ones I didn't mention on that basket previously were much narrower, actually. So it's kind of an interesting contrast. Anything else we should?
Well, I was just going to say these were probably, believe, were made maybe if David's style was
right
earlier, and this is a guy we're calling John. Probably made them later, and he may have even been the last maker. Could have been. It's possible.
Yeah.
And this is a fun basket because
right.
you can see it. Josh, maybe you can run the slider down the side where Mrs. Schoenemann wrote her name in red on the side. And we just picture her going to a lot of church socials with her pies or something, but making sure she got her own basket back at the end of the day.
And then, so, and then we have, this is the last style, and the basket on the left is the one from the Vesterheim collection, but it's very similar. So this is what we think was the oldest style of basket that they were making. And because of the aging on the varnish and the patina, and it's got a willow infill, but it's still made like a knot basket, a Knutkurv. And then this one has various woods to make the vertical slats in it. And these are let into little grooves, just like the others. And then up here, it's got black ash handles with homemade hardware and a latch and purchased hinges. But the lid does open. So it's like a picnic basket, but it's so really quite small. So that's what we think is.
Yeah. And Fred, you're the expert woodworker, but I mean, to put these little at exactly
Yeah.
the right length and get them to end up inside of the frame like this. I mean,
Yeah.
an incredible amount of
because this is tapers,
Talent.
obviously. So each one's got to be cut individually.
very difficult.
But it's a great basket.
Yeah.
So, so those are the 3 styles that we found in Minnesota.
The 3 makers.
3 makers, yeah. So, and then, this is part of my basket collection. I've collected baskets my whole life and learned to do willow baskets when I was, I think, around 10 or 11. But I've always been super interested in baskets, and I'm hoping that with this project, I'll be learning more about how to make these Knutkurv baskets and put them in kind of a modern context using materials that we just have, like we did. I talked about earlier with the cedar and the box elder, and finding new materials to use to make them. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
And aren't you hoping there'd be some interest in learning?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So I'm definitely hoping to eventually teach.
Yeah.
So as well. So I'm going to make more baskets, but I do want to teach. That's part of it. So craft belongs to everybody. So
well, Fred's a great teacher, and I hope he puts together a course, and I hope you get a chance to take it if you're interested.
Thank you.
But yeah, we both love the idea of doing like Joran Anderson is doing, and carrying this forward and keeping it alive.
He's an inspiration. So
yeah. And what's next for me? So
it's such a great picture. I just love it.
Yeah, I like making the frames. I learn like something new each time, and then made another piece of firewood most of the time. But I want to, I just keep going back to these guys at the Poor Farm, in their 60s and 70s they live to, and they've made these things that have been around for 100 years that are truly works of art. They're just beautiful pieces that they're so functional, and I aspire to get to go in that direction. Anyway, right. I've got a long way to go, but they're fun to make. They're hard to make. Everything I know about woodworking is put to the test and putting these together. But that's kind of where I'd like to go with this. But I think now we'd just like to say thank you for listening, and also we really
hope we'd
love to hear from you. If you've got any more clues or answers to share with us, we'd sure love to hear from you.
Our research is ongoing, so and every week we get new bits of information, so pictures and things like that. So we're excited. We're still excited about this. It's just we have a passion for it, so it's really wonderful to be able to share it with you all.
And we're excited about it too. Josh and I have been really excited about this presentation and getting the opportunity to work with Jane and Fred in this way. And so we're going to try to hold him to his tease about teaching a class. So keep checking back in 2022 with Vesterheim. But there are some great questions people have submitted. Jane and Fred, are you open to answering some of these questions now?
You bet.
I guess so.
Great. So one of the questions was if there are any particular motifs that you see across the slats. I think it's the question came up during the construction process when you were talking about, using cedar or using something else. And so can you talk a little bit about any particular motifs?
I'm not sure what's meant by motifs, but I do know that there are a number of Knutkorg that I have seen that have burned decoration on the slats, the woven pieces, as well as the handles, which is also called Sendingskorg, and that's more typically found on tina on Norwegian boxes, which is what tina means. but that's more typically what you find
in Scandinavia.
Yeah,
not domestically.
Not domestically. We haven't seen anything other. I mean, if you consider the for the baskets we've found, really the only decoration is the patterning of the willow, or it's the basket itself, really what it is, but nothing decorative on them. They're all very plain.
No painted baskets here.
No. Yeah, painting is another thing you see on older baskets, obviously, with the telemark baskets and the Swedish baskets, that some of which we found at antique stores as well, but that's really it.
And there's a few stories here of folks who seem to have found some of these baskets here. Kristen says, I wasn't aware of these baskets until this summer when I purchased one at an antique show from a dealer from Minnesota. And he told me it was made at the Poor Farm in Duluth. As a weaver and crafter, I loved the construction. Contact me if you are interested in for cataloging purposes. So Kristen, you should send me an email so we can put you in touch with Fred and Jane, or we had Fred and Jane stuff on the screen too. You can find a little bit later.
Very exciting. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. So in the chat, we had a question about the baskets, the bottom of the baskets. Would you be able to possibly hold up one? They're wondering if they're woven as well or if they're flat. Okay, they're woven.
Yeah. And we do that one willow basket. That actually has a solid wood bottom. That one.
Mm-hmm.
So this is.
It looks like plywood, but we've determined it's
solid.
It's solid, yeah.
So
it's the same wood that the top is put together.
Here, well, in here.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting. The different. Some of it's just. Probably whatever wood they had lying around to make some of the slats. And then here's another one.
A woven bottom, but oddly enough, this is plywood, right?
Yeah, for the lids.
Yeah.
So it's more like a picnic basket with the plywood lids. Yeah. And we found several of those as well. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of questions here for you about construction. And I kind of feel like maybe the best way to say how they can answer those questions is when you have a class at Vesterheim on these boxes, they can come take a class from that. I'm not sure we can get into all the nitty-gritties of assembly here on the screen, but I do want to share another story that was posted in the chat here in the Q&A here by Susan, who also has a connection to these baskets. So Susan says, a small group of these baskets came up for auction in Cannon Falls, Minnesota recently from the transient camp circa 1933. The maker is John N., a local to me antiques dealer, purchased one from the auction and had it in his shop for sale.
Huh.
So, now there'll be a stampede.
Well, yeah. I think I do. So that name sounds very familiar.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Wherever it ends up, I hope we get a chance to look at it and measure it and appreciate it.
Yeah. All I can say is about the construction, I won't get into it too much, is, in one sense, they're very simple baskets. Because there's only 4 main pieces, but to make the joints and make them work really well is tough. And to get them to bend without breaking, unless you do something like boil hot water on them or steam them or pick them at the right time of the year. And that's really more the critical part if you're going to do completely green woodworking. Otherwise, you have to use something like hot water or maybe a little downy fabric softener, but those are just things to do.
And I think the dimensions are important too.
Yes.
I mean, that angle that's just enough to make it, how do I do this?
Yeah.
Just enough, but not too much so that you've got a real tight angle up here and a real obtuse angle there.
Yeah.
I guess is you don't want that. You want kind of a nice ratio of angles.
The telemark baskets though, and I don't know, you've got the ones in your collection at the Vesterheim are not that flared out, but there are some that are very extreme. and those show gaps in the lower corners. Yes, exactly. The gaps in the lower corners on the really extreme ones are much larger, so you have to make little rounded cuts at the bottom, and then they get very tight at the top. But they're almost like a tray with these big hoop handles. Some of them, they're very extreme, and the telemark ones almost always have flattened frames when they're made. Not always, but a lot of times.
So Cody has a question, and maybe in your research you uncovered some of this, but the Sendingskorg seem like they'd take an awful long time to make and potentially be way more valuable than the gifts inside. Could the baskets have been a part of a cultural gift themselves?
I think I probably didn't make that clear. That would have been exactly what it was, is a gift, a basket that was meant to be cherished for forever. And that's, I think, how a lot of these beautiful painted baskets ended up here with the immigrants that brought them, because they were just such treasures. Probably, they were received at a wedding or a special time like that, and there's no way they'd part with them. So exactly. Yeah, you nailed it, Cody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a question here that might be a humorous question. Is here in the United States, would you say that your own private collection is now the largest collection of Knutkorg in the United States, even bigger than the 6 we have here at Vesterheim?
Mine isn't, but I think Jane's is. Yes. Well, you've got a lot of. Well, we do know one other person that has quite a large collection. But it's pretty varied. But yours is too. So
I've got like 6 or 7.
Yeah, but then there's all the ones you've made too. So.
Yeah, and I want to stay married, so I'm.
There you go.
Well, folks, I think we might have time for one more question here before we start wrapping things up. I do also want to say that folks out there in the world, as you find more of these baskets, Fred and Jane have this as an ongoing research project. So it isn't one and done. If you send pictures to them via email, I know it would mean the world to them to help keep this tradition alive and keep tracing through some of those connections.
Thank you.
Thanks for saying that, Josh.
Yeah, appreciate that.
So I was going to ask, there's a question from Alex here. I know you mentioned a couple of the possible types of local timbers that you experimented with, but can you speak to that a little bit? And then also, do you know what materials were predominantly used in Scandinavia for these baskets?
Okay. Yeah, as we mentioned, we used box elder, which is probably not a traditional material, but it's what we had. It's what we found. So that's what we used. In Scandinavia, it seems to be that almost all the frames are willow. I have heard that from a couple people, and I'm just putting out that frames on some baskets were ash, but that doesn't make sense to me because I don't think ash grows up in telemark.
And I've heard hazelnut.
And hazel? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't know that. But the hazel that grows in Scandinavia is very different than the one we have here, which has a very short fiber and does not bend well at all. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the same materials of willow, and then the handles probably were ash or even could be birch. But the infill in Scandinavia tends to be pine chips.
Cedar is not even really fine.
No. I mean, they have a juniper.
Yeah.
But they don't have the same white cedar, which we have here. So which is what the gentlemen were using to build these baskets predominantly, with the willow frame. And
that's kind of a nice segue to back to the Poor Farm. And we took a little field trip up there, and it's the area's changed a lot. It's near the UMD campus, and it's now kind of a public safety area for the St. Louis County. But connected to the Poor Farm was the Paupers Cemetery. And if you pictured being an inmate at the at the Poor Farm, and you wouldn't have a vehicle. If you had a vehicle, you probably wouldn't be there, but you'd be forced to go out on foot probably and collect what you needed to make these things. And you could find ash, cedar, and willow
right
within an easy walk of the area. And then here's this little pauper cemetery, Calgary Cemetery. It's just a tiny little place. They didn't have any headstones. There's just one marker for the almost 5,000 people that are buried there. And I'll just tell what we found out. So we tracked this maker making these things, and then there was a research project between the St. Louis County Historical Society and the and UMD up there, where they took the death records for the residents of the Poor Farm and put down what they died of, tuberculosis or a heart attack or whatever. And we found David, and he had hung himself. And wow.
So those connect, these baskets hold a spirit of a person, they really do. And it's quite something. There's a real connection to an individual. So it meant a lot to us to do this research that way.